Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and go and get that lovely drink because you're about to listen to the final part of this very intriguing story. And it turns out to be quite the miracle, it really does. So let's continue with part 4 of our story tonight. How awful, I said. That you had such a contemptuous sister, I mean. Russell Dyer hung his head sadly and said, I don't know what was wrong with Caitlin, but she didn't make any friends. Most people avoided her like the plague, and wisely so. She became quite the bully, and was nearly expelled from school 2 times by Mrs. Mackerfield, who was a weak-willed woman, and when my father gave her school a sizable donation, she folded and let Caitlin remain at school. But my sister was always causing problems wherever she went. But I guess money talks, and my father paid that school a whole lot of money to keep Caitlin there. I remember my parents had to pay the dental bills for a kid at school, believe it or not, that had lost her 2 front teeth due to Caitlin kicking the poor girl in the mouth. But what was her problem? I asked. Why did she act out so much? Why was she so aggressive? She sounds like a feral cat that lashes out at you with its paws. That's an excellent way to put it. I think Caitlin was feral, Russell admitted to me. She resented the fact that my parents lived a humble life, you know, even though they were sitting on a fortune. My parents never let it be known how wealthy they really were. But unfortunately, my father didn't always lock his desk, and on his part, that was a big mistake. Caitlin was snooping around one day and stumbled across my father's bank statement. When she found it, all hell broke out in our household, let me tell you. She went completely ballistic. And when I mean ballistic, I mean she went into an indignant rant, rather like a rhino that you've let loose into your house, that begins to attack everything that crosses its path. That bad? I asked in bewilderment. That bad. I mean she indignantly marched towards my dad, thrusting the bank balance into his hand, and asking him to explain himself, as if my father was a naughty kid that needed to be severely reprimanded for very bad, insubordinate behaviour. What is that, Dad? What have I just handed you right now? This is my bank balance, Caitlin, and I don't know what you are doing with it, because you are not supposed to look through my stuff. This is private. It has nothing to do with you. Not so private anymore, Dad, because I know now, and you know what I know, Dad? Is you've been hiding a treacherous secret from us all. You're stinking rich, she yelled at him. Why are we living as if we're as poor as church mice? With your kind of money, you and Mum should be driving a Rolls Royce. We should be living in a castle with a fort. But no, you're too mean to spend a dime of your money on us. Isn't that the truth? We could have fine, glamorous things in our lives like the celebrities do. But you want to sit on your money, is that it? We live the way we do, Caitlin, because I like it that way, said my father, stroking his moustache somewhat uncomfortably, as he was somewhat bewildered that Caitlin had been snooping around his desk, and knew how wealthy my father actually was. Me and your mother, we like the simple life. We always have. We have no need for luxury. We have everything we need. We are self-sufficient in every regard. And you have a very good quality of life. You have nothing to complain about. Caitlin began cantankerously throwing things around our cabin. She picked up my mother's special plates and glasses and threw them against the wall, as if it was a Greek family wedding. She spat on the floor in disgust as she glared at my dad defiantly, with eyes filled with a savage hate. I'm glad you're so happy, Dad, living in this dump, but I'm not. I want you to buy us a grand home. I want you to have fancy cars parked on the driveway. I want us to go on fancy, luxurious holidays to places like Monaco and the Swiss Alps. If we're rich, we should live like we are. I don't want to live in this miserable cabin. I want fashionable clothes. And for you to drive a cool car instead of that beat-up old Ford you always drive. That's not going to happen, Caitlin. Not under my watch, my father told her sternly. I do not want to live in a castle with a fort. I don't want to drive a Rolls-Royce. I don't want to go on pretentious family holidays to places like Monaco or the Swiss Alps. No, thank you very much. I couldn't think of anything I'd loathe more. Besides anything else, I'm fond of my Ford. You like that dilapidated chunk of metal, do you? Honestly, Dad, what is wrong with you? You're out of your mind. Why can't you be normal like other people's parents? Most people, when they're rich, they like to show it. But no, not you. My father kept telling Caitlin that just because our lives weren't adorned or upholstered with opulent trappings that luxury so often provides, did not mean that we didn't have a high standard of living. Far from it, in fact. He said that our lives may be simple, but we wanted for nothing, which was true. But Caitlin wasn't buying any of that. She hated the fact that my parents had free-range hens wandering around the place. She hated our cows, that we milked. She hated the fact that we grew our own vegetables. She said we lived like the Amish, and that Dad was a total embarrassment to her. Beyond all that, image was extremely important to my sister Caitlin, especially when she entered her teen years. She wanted to be the rich kid at school, wearing fancy clothes with expensive toys that all the kids would lightly envy. Sadly for her, my parents never indulged her fanciful whims. Mum and Dad remained as reclusive as ever, so they hated drawing attention to themselves. But Caitlin wanted to drag our family into the limelight of public scrutiny. She loved attention and caused drama wherever she went. That was who my sister was. She made my parents' lives extremely uncomfortable. She became the thorn in their side, so to speak, causing chaos in her wake, rather like looking after a dangerous dog that gets off the lead for a moment and all hell breaks loose. But why didn't your father want to spend any of his money? I asked curiously. I mean, it's clear he was an incredibly wealthy man. He wasn't one of these people that enjoys watching the numbers in his bank account grow bigger every month, was he? With an accumulating interest or so? No, not at all, Russell told me. As I keep telling you, my parents were simple people. They liked an ordinary, very quiet life, much like I do. They enjoyed being self-sufficient and buying as little as possible. They didn't care about their money at all. But my sister cared about it very much, more than anything else in the world. She called my father miserly and mean. She kept threatening to leave our home at every opportunity. She said she was very miserable living with us. She had a boyfriend called Badger Marcus, and he was a badger because he was always very bad-tempered. She was always going off with the man, and she'd smoke with him in his clapped-out truck. She'd come home incredibly drunk at all hours of the night and morning. Eventually my parents gave up on Caitlin, or trying to discipline her in any way. There really was no point. They realized that she was like an unbridled wild mare that you simply could not control. My mother, of course, thought Badger Marcus was a shady individual. My parents never warmed to the man. Caitlin constantly bickered and complained about what a terrible life she had living with our family, and how much better she'd have been if she didn't have such weird parents who she considered to be extremely reclusive. She kept telling my mother and father that they were freaks. What's wrong with you, Dad? Why can't you be normal like my friends' parents? Why do you and Mum never talk to anyone? You're super weird. We talk to people when we need to, Caitlin, my father said. But by nature, we're quiet people. There's nothing wrong with being like that. It's called being private. There's everything wrong with it, Dad. It's not normal. You and Mum are not normal, Caitlin blubbered. People in town think our family is weird. You, Dad, everybody calls a recluse. I don't mind being called a recluse, Caitlin, because it's true. It's who I am, and I'm not ashamed of it. One day my dad had grown so tired of Caitlin's constant nagging that he called her into his little study, and he wrote her a very hefty cheque. And when I say hefty, I mean hefty. I guess he knew that money was Caitlin's language. I have no idea how much it was, but it was a sizable amount of money, believe me. So much so that she could afford to indulge many of her fanciful whims. And off she went with her boyfriend Badger. And yes, she married the man. Bought a house in Toronto. And they had 3 children, I believe it was. although my parents knew nothing about that at the time. We never heard from her again. My parents were devastated when my father realized that Caitlin viewed our family with so much disdain. They were very disappointed not to hear from her again. It wasn't an easy decision, of course, for my father to cut Caitlin off from his will, leaving everything to me. He warned me, of course, that once he and Mum had died, that Caitlin would reappear, rather like the genii on Aladdin's lamp, and would come sniffing after his estate. And she did just that. I guess my father knew what Caitlin was really like. My dad died a year after my mother did. My mother sadly died of a stroke, and my father died of a broken heart a year after my mother's death. I think he missed her so very much. He stopped eating and taking good care of himself. I think he willed himself to die. That's what I really think happened, as he completely lost the will to live. My parents were like two peas in a pod, you see. One didn't function terribly well without the other. I could see him fading away before my very eyes, and I couldn't do anything to stop it, even though I tried to advise him to get grief counselling. But try telling a recluse to do that. You'll have your work cut out for you, believe me. Besides, how could I get my dad to do something I would never have done myself, were I to be wearing his boots? Well, I've heard that people can give up on life, you know, when they lose someone they love very much. It's more common than you know, I admitted. If it's any consolation, Russell, I very much doubt you could have done anything to stop your father's decline. If someone wants to die, and they will themselves to do so, they probably will. Russell nodded soberly and continued, Well, anyway, after Dad died, who should show up for his funeral but Caitlin herself, and I hadn't seen her for many, many years, so I got quite the shock. My dad had been right about this. You see, he knew how money-grubbing, shallow, self-centred and selfish Caitlin really was. She was wearing a black dress and a black veil, and she wept all over his coffin in front of all the spectators. But let me tell you, it was all for show. Crocodile tears, you could say. And anyone who witnessed her display at the funeral was saying, Bless her heart, she's very, very sad. It was weird, even though my parents were reclusive. Many people showed up for my father's funeral, because he had such a gentle nature. People who attended, on seeing Caitlin's theatrical display of grief, were saying that the prodigal daughter did love her father after all. But I knew it was all for show, to extract as much sympathy from people that she could. She made up so many stories about why she never got to visit my parents over the years, and the far-fetched stories kept changing to suit her artfully manipulative agenda, and people fell for her lies hook, line and sinker, because it's shocking how people can so easily be deceived. Of course, after my father's funeral, Caitlin stayed with me in the cabin for a few days, and the next thing I knew she was inquiring after his estate, and she blew a gasket when she realised she wasn't going to inherit a single thing. My father hadn't left her a bean. But he did leave her a letter, which she tore up in front of my face and never even bothered to read. I'm sure in the letter my father probably explained why he'd cut her off from his will. She tried to fight for half of my father's estate, but my dad's will was ironclad, so she didn't have a chance in being able to do that. After that, I guess she's been hounding me ever since, claiming she has a right to half of the inheritance. I would have happily given it to her, you know, but I refused, as the maliciously vindictive way she treated my parents was unforgivable as far as I'm concerned. My father had also begged me not to buckle under the pressure he suspected that Caitlin would put on me, which, believe me, she did. She ended up calling me all the names she used to call my father, but I shook off her mean jabs like water off a duck's back. I wasn't going to allow her to upset me. Good for you, Russell, I said encouragingly. When Russell told me all this, it alarmed me significantly that his sister Caitlin wouldn't leave him alone. I knew very well how Russell Dyer was a natural recluse. He didn't appreciate social interactions with the outside world very much. He kept those to a bare minimum. I was the exception to that rule. It would seem Caitlin kept visiting Jasper every few months. She would be seen in town by many of the locals on a regular basis, In my opinion, her intentions of being in Jasper were to visit her brother Russell and put pressure on him to give her half of her father's estate. She first tried the charm offensive, and when that failed to work for her, she became insolently angry and called Russell all kinds of derogatory, degrading names. Unfortunately, I witnessed this myself one day, when I came over to see Russell at the cabin, and there was Caitlin's car parked in the driveway. I recognised it at once. It was a large mustard-coloured SUV, with stickers on the back that said child on board. I remember approaching the cabin and hearing all the screaming going on. The screaming was coming from a woman. I approached the door rather nervously and listened in. I heard Russell being called every curse word you can ever imagine. I heard Russell saying, "There's no need to be so rude and to call me so many disagreeable names. We've been through this over and over again, Caitlin. Too many times to count. I told you that Dad didn't want you to inherit any of his estate." "Dad isn't alive, you stupid idiot! You don't have to honour his perverse will, do you?" "I'm afraid I do, Caitlin. I'm sorry," Russell said. "You know what, Russell? You're just like Dad, a complete and utter freak. Look at you. You've made nothing of your life. You live here like a hermit. You're a loser, just like Mum and Dad were, a complete loser." "Please will you go, Caitlin?" came Russell's voice. "I don't want you coming back until you've cleaned that mouth out of yours." "Don't worry, I'm not coming back ever," said Caitlin's indignant voice. The door flung open rather abruptly, and Caitlin marched down the steps of the wraparound porch. Her face was as red as a tomato. She was waving her fists contemptuously in the air, as if she'd like to punch Russell's lights out. "I hope you get what's coming to you, Russell, because half that money is mine, and you know it," she snorted. When she saw me hanging around the front door of the cabin, she glared at me and said, "Who are you? What are you doing here? What are you staring at? Why don't you get the hell away from here? I don't know who the hell you are, but go away." I remember thinking to myself that I had never encountered anyone more obnoxious before. It was 6 months before Russell's death that on a visit to see him, he told me that Caitlin had paid him another visit. I think the words I used were, "Please, God, not again. What does she want now?" I don't suppose I need to ask, do I? For a moment Russell was very quiet. He looked rather reflective. Then he looked at me soberly and said, "Caitlin came to see me at the cabin today, with a proposal. She told me that even if I'm not willing to give her half of my parents' estate, would I at the very least agree to make her beneficiary of my will if anything bad were to happen to me. She's asked that if she then dies before me, would I at least agree to leave the family money to her 3 children. I thought about it for a moment and then agreed. My parents never even knew they had grandchildren, so I'm sure they would have been delighted for their grandchildren to have inherited something from them. So I agreed to her proposal." "But I thought you said you wanted to leave your estate to rhino conservation in Africa. You wanted to help endangered wild animals, did you not? That's your passion. I thought you weren't going to leave anything to Caitlin. Besides, she's almost your age. You might very well outlive her." "I still will leave a contribution to endangered rhinos in Africa," said Russell, "and I'll definitely make it generous. My father would most certainly have approved of that. He had a soft spot for rhinos like I do. The creatures fascinated him, as they do me. And he was very angry and outraged by all the rhino poaching around the world. But I thought about my sister's children, and given they are my parents' grandchildren, and they've done nothing wrong, I guess I folded under Caitlin's request, so I've agreed to change my will. And so, yes, I've made my sister my beneficiary. If I should die, that is. And failing that, if she predeceases me, then her children will at least inherit my father's estate. It seems fair enough to me, don't you think?" "So you're letting your sister get to you, Russell? I warned you that this might happen. You're letting her crawl under your skin like a maggot. Something isn't right about all this. Don't let her bully you and manipulate you like this. That's all she's done her entire life, trying to control people. Something feels nefarious about all this. I don't trust Caitlin as far as you can throw her. I'm telling you, Russell, she's up to something. You know, Verity, I'm a reclusive man. I've never married. I live on my own, and you are my only friend. I don't get lonely, nor do I ever get sad. This is the life that I thoroughly enjoy leading. Many people would never understand that, but it's the way I'm wired, much like my late parents were. I personally hate social interactions of any kind, and over the years Caitlin has been visiting my cabin again and again, demanding for me to give her half the estate. I have found her visits infuriating, for I've never enjoyed her company, and every time she comes here she loses her rag and gets extremely enraged. She's been as bad as a mosquito, buzzing around me all the time, refusing to leave me alone. I've never buckled under her pressure, but she has assured me if I agree to do this one thing for her, I won't ever have to see her again for dust. And that's a huge weight off my mind, Verity, let me tell you. I don't enjoy her coming around here at all. She's not a good person. She's trouble. And if she's out of my hair for good, I can breathe again. And that's worth all the money in the world, let me tell you. When Russell shared all this with me, I had a bad feeling about all this, and lo and behold, 6 months later, he was found hanging from a tree in his wood grove, his death deemed suspicious by the coroner. I spoke to the police on multiple occasions regarding Russell's demise, and they agreed that Caitlin was behind her brother's death, but they couldn't prove a single thing without more substantial evidence to back up their core instincts. It was a while later, after Russell Dyer's 18-acre plot of land was sold by the greedy Caitlin Dyer herself, that I was to learn that a retired couple called Mr. Kurt and Mrs. Prt4of4 had bought the property and were building their retirement home on the land. Once the couple had moved into their new home, I made it my business to go and visit them. I wanted to get to know my neighbours, as I had got to know Russell Dyer. I always believe in getting to know your neighbours. Soon me and my brother and my 2 children, Jacob and Mallory, became firm friends with the Farnboroughs. I liked Prt4of4 from the very first moment I met her, despite the age difference between the 2 of us. She just had a gentle nature and a great sense of humour, and we soon became the very best of friends. I introduced Frida to many of my friends that were living in Jasper. She also attended art classes with me, where we learnt how to paint landscapes under the guidance of a master artist. There were times Frida agreed to watch over my children for me, so we helped each other out wherever we could. Frida's fast decline in her mental health became rapid, so much so it was quite alarming. I do recall we were both enjoying lunch together in one of our favourite haunts that we visited in town quite regularly, and a while later she was complaining she was hungry and hadn't eaten all day long, and that we should go and eat something. She had completely forgotten we had eaten only moments before. I also observed that she forgot names and places, and when she tried to tell me something, she'd become confused and forget what she was saying in the middle of a sentence. She became exceedingly disorientated. Very often she'd give me a blank stare, almost as if she was no longer present in her own body. I remember thinking to myself that Frida was showing signs of Alzheimer's. I recognised the symptoms because a dear friend of ours had developed the disease, and now this woman was living in an assisted care facility in Canada, and although she regularly smiles and laughs, she doesn't know who she is anymore, and she doesn't remember anyone who visits her, least of all her own family. It wasn't easy confiding in Prt4of4 about his wife's idiosyncratic behaviour and her extreme forgetfulness, but I was relieved to learn that he had noticed a decline in his wife's mental function, and her strange behaviours were causing him great concern. I felt extremely sorry for Prt4of4 because he had built this incredible property of his for their retirement on the most exquisite piece of land, and I very much doubted he had anticipated that his wife Frida's mental health would decline so rapidly. I'm not sure he knew what the future now held for the both of them. I think he realised even before he went to visit the doctor that he was losing his wife, who was his very best friend, and that could not have been easy for him. I remember wishing him all the luck in the world when he took Frida to see the primary care physician, But in truth I knew exactly what the diagnosis would be. As was expected, Frida was referred to a neurologist, where numerous tests were done with her, which affirmed that she did indeed have Alzheimer's disease. I assured Kurt that I would be there for him every step of the way, should he ever need my help, and I was faithful to my promises. One day while Kurt went shopping, I came over to the house with my 7-year-old son Jacob and my 4-year-old daughter Mallory, and assured Kurt I'd take care of his wife for him. Kurt was very grateful and thanked me profusely for looking after Frida for him. He then got into his car with his 2 King Charles Spaniels that accompanied him wherever he went, and then drove away. I knew Kurt wouldn't be away for too long, but I wasn't bothered about how long he would be. I mean, how hard could it be to look after a woman with Alzheimer's disease, along with 2 rambunctiously naughty children? I was to learn it wouldn't be an easy ride by any manner of means. "So how are you today, Frida?" I asked, forcing myself to sound jolly and cheerful. I put an apron on over my jeans, and Frida gave me a gormless grin and chuckled, and then she said, "Who are you?" I remember her eyes looked so vacuously empty. It was as if the Frida I had known and loved was no longer in residence, and even my children, who were too young to really understand what was going on with Frida, were profoundly aware that Frida wasn't behaving like she'd done in the past. I remember my son was looking at Frida with wide eyes, as if to say, "What's wrong with you?" "I'm Verity, don't you remember, Frida? I live next door to you, on the other 18-acre plot of land, right next to yours. Don't you remember? We've known each other for quite a while now. These are my children, Jacob and Mallory. They've often come over to the house to play. They love your spaniels. I tell you what, Frida, why don't you remain seated at the kitchen table? How about I make you a toasted sandwich? You'd like a cheesy toasty, won't you, Frida? I know how much you like cheese." Frida began to chuckle, and so I got to work preparing a cheesy toasty for her, while Frida just stared vacuously into space, as if she wasn't looking at anything in particular. I had brought along colouring books for my children to play with, but they weren't doing any colouring in. They began to play up, and appeared to have abandoned their crayons on the far end of the kitchen, as if they'd become bored with colouring in all of a sudden. Then I saw my son climbing on top of the countertops, using one of the kitchen chairs. He walked over the countertops with a 5-litre carton of milk in his hand, along with a box of Cocoa Pops that he'd retrieved from the upper cupboard. "What are you doing, Jacob?" I asked my son. "Get off the countertop at once!" I scolded him. "I want some cereal," he said. "I want some Cocoa Pops. I'm really hungry, Mummy. My stomach is rumbling very badly." "Get down from the countertop at once. What are you doing on there, for goodness sake? This isn't even your house, Jacob. You don't go walking on other people's countertops. And what if you were to fall? You could hurt yourself. Did you stop to think about that for a second?" "The Cocoa Pops were in that cupboard up there. I couldn't reach, Mummy. I'm hungry. My tummy's hurting." "Get down, love. It's not safe for you to be walking on the countertops. I'm making a cheesy toasty for Frida, and then I'll make you some Cocoa Pops for you and Mallory." "But I want a cheesy toasty too," said Jacob. I sighed in exasperation. "Very well, I'll make you a cheesy toasty as well. Now get down, will you, Jacob? Give me that milk before you drop it all over the place, will you?" My worst fears were confirmed, as suddenly the 5-litre bottle of milk and the box of Cocoa Pops and cereal slipped out of my son's hands and went flying around the kitchen. The kitchen floor became like a skating rink. I looked down at the mess that my son had created, and much of the milk on the floor was turning chocolate from the cocoa pots, and Frida began to clap with delight, as if my son had done something quite wonderful. She was chuckling and laughing. At least we got something out of her. I wasn't pleased with Jacob's uncontrollable behaviour. It was extremely unlike him to act out like this, but he seemed pleased to have put a smile on Frida's face, and began to grin like a cheeky Cheshire cat that was up to no good. I gingerly lifted Jacob off the countertop, placing him gently at the far end of the kitchen, where the floor was dry, and he'd be unlikely to slip. My little girl Mallory was now bending over the floor, walking all over the spilt milk, picking up the sodden Cocoa Pops and trying to eat them. She had chocolate stains all over her mouth and was running after the Cocoa Pops as if they were tadpoles in a puddle that she was desperately trying to catch. I snatched my daughter's hand away. "Stop eating off the floor, Mallory! It's dirty!" I cried out in frustration. "There are germs on the floor." I looked up at my son again. "What have you done, Jacob? There's milk everywhere, Cocoa Pops all over the place." "But I'm hungry, Mummy. I want a cheesy toastie and I want some Cocoa Pops. So does Mallory." "Well, you've succeeded in spilling Cocoa Pops all over the floor. But once I've cleaned this mess up, I'll get you something, I promise. I think there is another box of Cocoa Pops in the cupboard, so you're very lucky about that." I was feeling so frustrated, like any mother would be in my shoes, with her badly behaved kids. But I knew I needed to clean up the mess before anyone slipped and fell. After I mopped up the milk that had been spilt and cleaned away all the cereal that my kids had trodden into the floor, I sat them both down with some Cocoa Pops. I wiped Mallory's grubby hands and mouth with a warm cloth, and proceeded to prepare some cheese toasties. I could hear my children munching happily away at their cereal, and that was when my son said, "Why did Frida go for a walk in the woods, Mummy? Where's she going? She's acting very funny." I had been so busy cleaning up the mess in the kitchen that I'd failed to even notice that Frida was missing. Where was she? My heart began to race in my chest. My breathing intensified. I began to decidedly panic when I realised that Frida was definitely not in the house. What if she had got drowned in the lake? Those were the very first thoughts that entered my head. But from the window I could thankfully see the lake very clearly, and there was no sign of Frida anywhere. But I noticed a muddy trail of footsteps leading straight into the woodgrove, so I had a reasonably good idea where I could find Frida. And given my son had seen her going off into the woods, that was where she'd likely be found. In a panic, I called my sister, who was thankfully at the time staying at my house for a few days. So I told her to come over to the house at once, as I had a major problem on my hands, and I needed her to watch over my children for me. When my sister arrived at the Farnborough house, in her SUV, she went straight into the kitchen to watch over the children. She was looking somewhat flustered and confused. "What's all this about?" she asked. "Never you mind," I told her, pushing past her as fast as I could. "Just you stay there. Watch over the kids for me. Make them some cheese toasties. I'll explain later." I frantically began to follow Frida's muddy footsteps towards the woodgrove, but soon they disappeared, as the ground visibly hardened. I was cursing myself under my breath for allowing any of this to happen. How could I be so damned irresponsible, so dreadfully stupid? How could I have failed not to notice Frida leaving the kitchen like she did? What on earth was wrong with me? I had been so preoccupied cleaning up the kitchen floor and attending to my children's needs that I'd clean forgotten all about Frida. I had no idea how long Frida had been missing for. I knew, of course, that if my kids had not been playing up, I wouldn't have let Frida out of my sight. And on this large, extensive 18-acre plot of land, Frida could be absolutely anywhere. But I doubted she could have got very far, and at least I knew she wasn't in the lake, and that was a huge relief. I had very clearly seen the fresh muddy trail of footprints leading straight to the woods. I was thanking God for the recent rainfall, or I'd have been driving myself half mad, believing Frida had drowned in the lake. I was worried about what Kurt would think of me when he returned home, to find that I'd failed him abysmally in taking care of his wife. It was such a beautiful day, and we have many beautiful days in this part of the world. When I entered the woodgrove, the woods were alive with the tweets and warbles of the pretty bird song. The sun cast trickles of sparkling light through the canopy, so that the moss, the leaves, and the ferns became every variable colour of green you could possibly get. I was concerned about Frida being in the woodgrove like this. As with her mental decline, she'd also become extremely clumsy and uncoordinated on her feet, and with all these burgeoning roots lambasting their way through the forest floor, there was a very real possibility that she could take a nasty fall and do herself some real harm, and that was a significant worry. "Frida! Frida!" I called out. "Where are you?" No sound came back to me, apart from the echo of my own voice. I wondered if I should go back to the house and call the police or something, but that would take up far too much time. She must be around here somewhere, I thought. If she heard me calling out, she wouldn't likely answer me, because these days she barely responded very much to anything. There were several paths in the woodgrove, but the question was which one should I take. The forest floor was covered in burgeoning vegetation, from ferns to shade-loving plants, all clustered together under the trees, where they blocked out any muddy patches, where I might find a shoe print that probably belonged to Frida. I decided to take the path straight through the trees that I knew Frida was well acquainted with, although whether she would remember such a path was exceedingly doubtful, I thought. I almost stopped dead in my tracks, because there Frida was, with a Bigfoot at her side. I got the sense the Bigfoot was actually escorting her through the woods to get her back home to safety. It was the very same Bigfoot I'd seen that had rescued our cat from the jaws of a coyote. I wasn't remotely afraid of him, only extremely astonished and confounded to encounter him like this. Frida was walking beside him, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to be doing. But there was something profoundly different about her demeanour. When she looked up at me, she smiled, as if there was a vague recollection in her eyes of who I actually was, which hadn't happened for a long time. For a moment I stood very still in the woodgrove. Everything seemed to go quiet for a moment. I'm pretty certain even the bird song dissipated. The Bigfoot was absolutely gigantic, and in close proximity to him, I was suddenly very consciously aware of how tiny I felt by contrast. But I found myself looking directly into his treacle-coloured eyes, and for a brief moment our stares seemed to lock together. In that second the Bigfoot spoke to me telepathically in my head, and what he said was profoundly startling. "She's lost her mind," he said. I knew he was referring to Frida. "It's detached from the gumbra." I didn't know what gumbra meant, but I nodded in agreement with him. As one thing was for certain, Frida was suffering from Alzheimer's. "Make sure she wears the feather and stone around her neck for 7 days, said the Bigfoot, pointing to the leather thong around Frida's neck, where there was a stone and eagle's feather attached. "Don't let her remove it. Not until the 7th day is over. Then I would fully appreciate you leaving the pendant outside your front door, so I can retrieve it, for I will need the stone and feather back." "But of course," I said, "I'll do that." The Bigfoot looked at me steadily and nodded. "It's not good when the gumbra comes loose. People can act strange when that happens. All will be well," he reassured me. With that, the Bigfoot turned around and glided away, and I walked back home with Frida at my side, wondering what this all could mean. When Kurt returned home, I told him about the rather paradoxical encounter I'd had with the Bigfoot, and how his wife had wandered off. I also told him that the Bigfoot insisted that Frida should continue wearing that pendant around her neck for the next 7 days. "Well, we'll do what he says. We'll humour him," said Kurt, looking rather doubtful. But in the days that followed, we could not believe the profound changes to Frida. The woman I thought had gone for good seemed to reawaken, as if she'd risen from a deep sleep. Indeed, she was back to her old self again, and her memory was so incredibly sharp that she was beginning to remember events from her early childhood with a crystal-clear clarity, things that even when she was compos mentis, she had forgotten all about. Kurt took his wife back to the neurologist, who said that Frida no longer had any signs of Alzheimer's disease. "How is this possible?" he asked Kurt. "What did you do?" Kurt knew better than to tell the neurologist about the Bigfoot, so he simply said, "I really don't know." "Well, it's an extraordinary miracle. Never seen anything like it before. You have your wife back, Mr. Farnborough." It was a year after Frida came back to us, sharper and brighter than ever before. But she had no memory of the Bigfoot that had helped her recover her cognitive thinking. We did leave the pendant outside the front door, as promised, after the 7th day, and sure enough it was retrieved by the Bigfoot. One day it was all over town that Caitlin Dyer had been arrested, as a prisoner had come forward with a plea deal to lessen his sentence. He informed the police that Caitlin hired him to murder her brother Russell, and to make it look like a suicide. So Frida was right when she said karma is a bitch, because Caitlin's evil deeds finally did catch up with her in the end. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.